We have just completed importing our PM 2.5 data into the import table, and now we are in the form where we're going to transfer the PM 2.5 data into the verification table. So I begin with step D of selecting my site and sampler. My PM 2.5 monitor is currently located at site S98, so I select that, and then I select my sampler of INPM25. And now I need to work on the field mapping step for my PM 2.5 data, just like I did for my ozone data. So I click on the E, Setup Transfer to Data Verification Table button. That opens up a blank query in Design View. And had I already imported a PM 2.5 file into the toolbox, this would already be filled in. But since this is the first time I have imported PM 2.5 data into the toolbox, I need to do this field mapping step. So as you can see by the vertical scroll bar that's in Table Data Import, there are lots of columns in the data import table. And many of those columns I am not going to be using in the verification table. So I'm just going to leave those in the data import table and only transfer the data from that import that we need. So if I scroll down, I can see all of the different columns, and most of these we do not need. We really only need a date field, a time field, and a concentration field. So since most of these columns we don't need, I'm going to use a different method than the click and drag method that I demonstrated for the ozone data. And the method I'm going to use is just double clicking on the fields I need in the table data import. So as I mentioned, I need a date field, a time field, and a concentration. Those are the minimum fields that you need in the verification table. So I look here and I see a time field, but I don't see a date field. And I remember that I wrote in my database logbook that the time field actually included both of the date and time values. So I really only need the time and the concentration fields in the blank table area. So the easiest way to do this is I can just double click on time, and that pulls it down into the query design grid. And I also need concentration, and those are the only two fields I need from table data import. So I double clicked on concentration and got that field as well. Remember that the append to row in the table area shows the columns in the data verification table that your data from the import table are going to be copied into. So in this example, the toolbox guessed that the time column from the data import table should be mapped into the time column in the data verification table. And it made this guess only because field names are the same both in the data import table and the data verification table. But remember that my time column for this particular data set actually includes both the date and the time. So this was an incorrect guess by the toolbox, but you can't blame it. I mean, the column names are the same, but that's okay because we can usually change the append to row. So to do that, we need to click in the append to row for the time column, and that brings up that drop down arrow, and we can click on that drop down arrow to see the list of columns that are available in the verification table. So you'll notice that the scroll bar is right in the middle, so there's columns above it that aren't being shown, and there's the columns below it as well. So I can scroll up and I can scroll down. So looky here, date time column, and that's what I need because that means that both of my dates and my times will be represented. So I need to change that. So I'm just going to click on the date time, and that changes this. So now this is correct. My time column, which actually contains both the date and the time, is now being copied into the date time column in the verification table. And notice that the append to row for the concentration column is also blank, so we need to tell the toolbox where we want the concentration values from the data import table to be mapped to in the data verification table. So we click in the append to row for the concentration column, and that brings up the drop down arrow, and we click on the drop down arrow, and we find the concentration field, and we click on it to select it. And remember that you might have more columns with a blank append to row in your data set. In my particular data set, I only had one blank append to column. There might be more in your data. Once you have everything mapped out like you want it, you need to save the query. Before, for the ozone data, I showed you going to File and then Save. The other option is clicking on the little save icon. So I'm going to do that, and my query is saved. So I can click on the lower X to close the query. And remember that next time I import a PM 2.5 dataset into the toolbox, that field mapping is already going to be set up, and all I need to do when I click on this button, the E button, Setup Transfer to Data Verification, is make sure that the field mapping is correct. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the transfer by clicking on F, Transfer to Data Verification from Data Import. And I get the box about the append query and click yes. And 334 rows matches what's in my database logbook for the new import.txt file, so I click yes. And now I need to check that the transfer was successful, so I click on the Inspect Data Verification Table button, and that brings up this. And I notice that only the concentration column and the date time column are currently populated, and that makes sense because those are the only columns that I mapped to in the query design grid. I scroll through my data to make sure that this transfer was successful and there's not any blank rows or anything else suspicious about the data. What I do notice here is that my concentration values are integers, meaning there's no decimal point after them, and I'm going to do a quick check and just make sure those are also integer values in my new import text file. So my concentration values right here are 19, 23. Those are all integer values also in my new import text file. So that's okay. You might also want to check your original data file from your analyzer and make sure it's also integers in that file as well. If there was a difference, so say that in your file that's directly from the analyzer, this value is actually 19.54321. So just let us know if that happens. It shouldn't, but if it does, let us know and we can help you with that. This looks good, so I'm going to click on the lower X button to close this table. I proceed with the next step, which is update site ID and sampler ID, so I click on that button and get the message about the update query. Click yes, and it tells me I'm going to update 334 rows, which is what matches in my database logbook, so I click yes. And now I click on the view dates and times button, and this shows my data in sequential format if it wasn't already. I check that the start times in this table match the start time and end time in my database logbook. So 5/2015 at 8 a.m. The final time of this data file is 1/19/2015 at 7 a.m. and that matches what I have recorded in my database logbook for this file. So I can go ahead and click the X button to close this query. And the next button is the sample end time to start time correction button. I know from my PM 2.5 sampler that the sampling times in my file are start times, so I do not need to run this correction. So I record in my database logbook that I need to skip step J, sampling end time to start time correction. And that, remember that just because my PM 2.5 data are start times doesn't mean your PM 2.5 data are start times. You need to consult your sampler manual to determine if the times in your file are start times or end times. So now I have two options. I can continue to import and qualify pollutant concentrations or continue to import and qualify MET data. I'm working with PM 2.5, which is pollutant data. So I click on this first button here, and that is going to bring up this next form in the series, the final form in the series, which allows me to flag my data and send it to its permanent home in the archive table.